They thought it was just another quiet night in the woods. But by morning, 3 people were brutally murdered, a 12-year-old girl was missing, and the crime scene looked like something out of a horror film. No forced entry. No suspects. And 3 young children somehow left completely unharmed, just a few feet away from the slaughter. The case would become one of the most chilling and unsolved mysteries in American history. And over 40 years later, the forest still isn't done talking. This is the story of the Keddie Murders, what really happened in Cabin 28, and why some who entered never came back. It began with the kind of innocence that makes us all uneasy in retrospect. A remote mountain retreat, pale moonlight, an unremarkable cabin tucked away off the beaten path. In the spring of 1981, deep in the Sierra Nevada of Northern California, the hamlet of Keddie, California offered something rare: quiet, isolation, nature. The resort community of cabins that once catered to fishermen and hikers had long since faded into something more faded and forgotten. To a passing hiker, it might appear benign, just another stop-off, maybe a picnic by the creek, maybe a night under the stars and the whisper of pines. But for the family at Cabin 28, it became something altogether darker. The home within Cabin 28 had only been occupied since late 1980 by 36-year-old Glenna Sue Sharp and her 5 children. They had left Connecticut, seeking a new start in California, and settled in this quiet, isolated place. 5 children: John, 15, Sheila, 14, Tina, 12, Rick, 10, and Greg, 5. That night and the next morning, a boundary was crossed. In one moment the forestry, the hush of wind, the solitude that once seemed so inviting betrayed them. The evening of Saturday, April 11, 1981, started without alarm. Sue had given permission for the younger boys, Rick and Greg, and their friend Justin, to spend the night at the cabin. Meanwhile, her daughter Sheila headed to a friend's house for a sleepover in the neighboring cabin. The older son, John, and his friend Dana Wingate, 17, had been seen earlier in the day hitchhiking back toward Quincy from the resort. The dusk that settled around Cabin 28 must have looked serene, lamplight inside, the small hum of domestic life, the distant rush of a creek, the silhouettes of trees. But the ease was deceptive. In the early hours of April 12th, something intruded, something violent. When Sheila returned that morning, it was into an entirely different world. Around 10 a.m., Sheila unlocked the door of Cabin 28 and walked into a scene one will never forget. She found the bodies of her mother, Sue, barefoot and bound, her brother, John, and his friend, Dana Wingate, lying in the living room. All 3 had been murdered. The 2 younger boys, Rick and Greg, along with Justin, were found alive in the adjacent bedroom, seemingly untouched. But the horror around them was impossible to ignore. Sue's body was face down, hands and feet bound by electrical cord and medical tape. John was bound, his throat slashed. Dana had been beaten and strangled. The brutality was calculated, shocking. No forced entry was obvious. The phone was off the hook, lights were out, the curtains closed. And then there was Tina. The youngest daughter, 12 years old, was missing. No sign of her. The house stood basking in morning light, the woods quiet, and one child gone. The police would soon realize they were dealing not just with a home invasion, but with something far deeper, perhaps a ritual, perhaps a vendetta. But they could not say which. The investigators found knives, hammers, perhaps more than one assailant. The scene suggested 2 or more perpetrators. As the narrative in the media would later summarize, the scene suggests more than one killer. The deeper you look, the more unsettling the anomalies. Why were the 2 younger boys and the friend spared? Why did the killers leave no trace of forced entry? Why did the family's youngest daughter vanish? As news of the murders spread, the cabin and the resort took on a grim aura. The air that had once carried bird calls now carried the echo of dread. The registry of the resort remained open. The creek still flowed, but no passerby could again claim the simple innocence of a hike turned tranquil. Because amid those pines, blood had been spilled. In the days following the murders, the local law enforcement in the Plumas County, California Sheriff's Department began work. But the investigation was hampered almost immediately by a series of missteps. Forensic evidence was poorly preserved. Witness accounts were vague. Multiple suspects were identified and then discounted. One of the neighbors, a man named Justin Smart, whose stepfather Martin Smart lived nearby, was present in the house the night of the murders, and his behavior raised suspicion. His friend Justin later offered conflicting stories under hypnosis, saying he had dreamed details of the murders. The presence of his stepfather and another neighbor, John Bo Bubede, both of whom had shady backgrounds, only deepened the mystery. Bubede died in 1988. Smart died in 2000. In 2016, a hammer was found in a pond near Keddie, an object matching description of the one lost by Smart. Investigators now say it was evidently placed deliberately. DNA evidence recovered from tape at the scene has been matched to a living suspect as of 2018, and yet to this day, no one has been prosecuted. Meanwhile, little Tina's fate remained elusive. Her remains were discovered 3 years later in April 1984, near Feather Falls in Butte County, miles away from Cabin 28. A skull, mandible, some bones. Her body scattered, the killer long gone. The wilderness around the resort turned from charming to menacing. Where once hikers might wander, they now glimpsed ghosts of what had transpired. The story of hikers who enter a cabin and never return took on a tragic real-life dimension. What happened in Cabin 28? Was it a random home invasion gone horribly wrong? Or was it a planned execution by locals who knew the family and knew the terrain? Let's examine the plausible theories, layering fact and speculation, because the absence of closure itself becomes part of the story. Theory 1. A targeted murder and kidnapping. Sue Sharp had recently divorced and moved. Young Tina may have witnessed something. One suspect, Smart, allegedly told his counselor that Tina was killed because she witnessed the whole thing. Some locals say Dana had stolen LSD from local drug dealers, possibly connecting the case to something darker. The sheriff dismissed the drug link, but the suggestion persists. Theory 2. Obsession or personal vendetta. According to the mother of Justin Smart, Smart's father had resentment toward the Sharp family. Marilyn Smart claimed her husband Martin had burned an object at 2 a.m. the night of the murders. He had a grudge against Johnny Sharp. That suggests a motive beyond robbery, something personal buried in local feuds. Theory 3. Wilderness opportunity turned monstrous. The resort's isolation, the faint traffic, the few neighbors, all become key. The area was remote, cabins rented out, a single road in and out. An assailant could slip in, commit horror, vanish into the pines. In that sense, the hikers who found the cabin but never thinking to stay represent all of us, trekking into serene woods only to find that the wilderness has its own dark frontier. The boundary between nature's beauty and horror becomes blurred. The cabin is still there, or rather it was until 2004 when Cabin 28 was demolished. But in memory it lives, an empty lot in a forgotten resort, a waypoint for mystery hunters. Imagine you are a hiker arriving at Keddie in the present day. You pull off the road, straps on your backpack, you wander to the creek, you glance at the cabin still standing. Maybe you pause and think, this was once vacation country. You might pass Cabin 28's old site, or the very road where John and Dana hitchhiked to Quincy that afternoon. Now imagine entering Cabin 28's living room. The evidence suggests Sue's body lay near the sofa, the imprint of the butt of a pellet rifle on her temple, the electrical cords around wrists, the knives, the hammer. That level of violence in such a serene place, it twists the imagination. In the near hours around 1:15 a.m., a nearby couple awoke to muffled screams but dismissed them, went back to sleep. That, perhaps, was the final alarm. At dawn, the resort looked unchanged, but the inside of one home had been ravaged. To the hiker, it is a caution. Nature invites you in, but you are never quite hidden from what else may be out there. What if a group of hikers had stumbled on this refuge the day after the crime? What if they sensed something wrong, heard the creak but felt the silence of death instead of birds? The cabin stands or stood like a threshold. Step inside and your worldview shifts. Here is where innocence meets brutality. More than 4 decades later, the names remain: Glenna Sue Sharp, John Sharp, Dana Wingate, Tina Sharp. The killers? Still officially anonymous. Open file. The ruins of Cabin 28 demolished in 2004, But the case refuses to rest. The evidence keeps percolating. A hammer in a pond, DNA on tape, suspicion on a handful of men. But the payoff, the final arrest and conviction, remains absent. When we think of the hikers who found a cabin and never returned, we also think of the countless people who enter the woods expecting peace, and sometimes find the opposite. This story lingers because of that open door. That cabin, once a place of home, became a scene of unimaginable violence. The forest around it watches, the creek listens, and the hikers, who might wander there today, see not only the landscape, but the underside of mystery. I'll leave you with this. Next time you enter a forest cabin, imagine the hush of the night shifting. Imagine the footsteps that go unheard, the shadows that linger just beyond the lantern's glow. Because somewhere, in the silent pines and forgotten roads of Keddie, the answer still waits. The door remains unlocked, the window still frames the dark, and the cabin still asks, who entered and who left by the light of dawn?